A pretrial hearing for a federal classified documents case against former President Donald Trump has concluded. Trump's aide and his co-defendant, Walt Nauta, arrived at the courthouse in Florida earlier today. The former president did not appear, however, at the hearing. The conference lasted approximately 2 hours. Trump, we must remind you, faces a total of 37 counts related to sensitive materials that were recovered at his Mar-a-Lago estate. He has pleaded not guilty to all of them. Judge Aileen Cannon presided over a 1 hour and 40-minute hearing, no ruling on a trial calendar date. Joining us now for more is CBS News correspondent Cristian Benavides. Cristian, tell us what, from what we expected to hear, did not happen, what did happen, what do you know?
Right, Lilia. Well, look, all of this just wrapping up within the past really 15 to 20 minutes. We saw both teams heading out of the courthouse, getting into their respective vehicles and just sort of heading out of here without really saying anything. I have some notes from our producer who was in the courtroom telling me that basically the judge heard arguments on how to determine the trial schedule. It's something that we've been speaking about all day, Lilia. She will be issuing an order promptly after reviewing the arguments. Promptly, what does that mean? We don't have a set timeline. All that she said was promptly. It could be tonight, could be tomorrow. We just don't know. Now, the prosecution talked about how much discovery they've delivered, saying that they delivered a reasonable amount of discovery and that they don't really need to wait for a trial schedule to review the documents. And again, this coming from the prosecution. And also saying that the argument that, Trump is running for office, saying that that really shouldn't hold any water, that it should be that he is a private citizen and that everyone is treated equal and that he shouldn't get any sort of special consideration. Now, on the defense side, they are asking for another pretrial hearing to take place in November to discuss some of the wider issues at play here. And get this, now, according to our producer who was in the courtroom, they're proposing that the actual trial take place on November of 2024. Mid-November, meaning right after the election. Again, this is just a proposal, according to our producer who was in the courtroom, that was made by the Trump team. All of this, of course, weighing heavily on Judge Aileen Cannon, who, as we mentioned, is being watched closely by legal observers after last year's decision by the judge to assign a special master, something that was widely panned by the legal community and seen as preferential to the former president and eventually overruled by a panel of judges. So, again, those are the main headlines here, that we don't have a trial date just yet, but we do expect some sort of paper ruling to happen promptly, whatever it is that means. Lilia?
Well, that is an interesting indication that at least it was addressed or we believe it was addressed, that whether or not he's running for office, that should not weigh on the date of the trial. I want to bring in CBS News investigative producer Graham Cates. Graham, it's about just the facts of this case for people who are having a hard time keeping track of all of the cases. This is the second one. This is the first one at the federal level that former President Donald Trump was indicted for. Today, we heard the news of a potential other federal indictment coming. But let's talk about a little bit about what it is that he's being accused of and the relevance of this.
Yeah, so this is the one where he was accused of 37 felony federal counts related to the willful retention of national security information. This is known as the Mar-a-Lago documents case. The accusation is that he unlawfully retained information after he left the White House. Now, to walk that back, he also has a separate criminal indictment in New York State where he's accused of falsification of business records all the way from before he became president in 2016. And then earlier today, we were discussing that he received a target letter from the special counsel in D.C. related to their investigation into Trump's behavior after the 2020 election. It's often known as the January 6th investigation. And that one, he has not been indicted, but a target letter is an indication that he might. Now, in this case, so again, this is they were talking about whether this trial should be in December, which is when the special counsel has suggested they could start it. And Trump's team has said after the election. We've heard similar things in his other case in New York, where his team has maintained you can't possibly do this fairly while he is running for president. Now, in that case, the judge said, we're going to have this trial in March 2024. And he's indicated strongly during the hearings in that case, there's very little that they can do, he's maintained, to delay that. Now we are again waiting for Judge Aileen Cannon in the documents case to weigh and see if she takes a similar tack that, you know, him having an election is no different than some other person having job responsibilities. That's where we're waiting to see with this. Sorry, that was a lot of information, I know.
No, that was great. I think that you walked us through some of the important points here. I think one of the Trump teams of attorneys have put forward a number of reasonings why this case needs to be pushed. Of course, for the prosecution and for Jack Smith, it's in the best interest for all of these cases to be resolved, as it is for any prosecutor. But talk to us about, just from what you've heard, these I'm not going to call them excuses, but these reasonings as to why it should be pushed. What makes sense to you? What might a judge look at and say, you know what, that is fair? What is it that they're putting forward that would make sense in a court, not just politically speaking?
You know, a lot of this has to do with the ability to kind of process the documents being turned over. And so Trump's team said, we got 1 million pages worth of information so far. And the special counsel has said, yes, that's 1 million pages, but we're actually highlighting what we consider to be relevant to the case. So, and they've said that in filings previously. So there's even a kind of an argument about how much information they need to get through in order to be ready for a trial. Now, remember, this trial was initially scheduled for, it's still technically scheduled to begin in August. And that's kind of this like performatory thing where you kind of get the ball moving by scheduling this. And now in a normal case, a lot of it just kind of comes down to when the lawyers and the defendant can fit it into their schedule. But in this case, there's, you know, almost immediate, no matter what she says, you know that one side is going to be complaining about that. And so, you know, in terms of what's reasonable, it's hard to say when it's such a unique defendant. But we've seen with previous cases involving him, they've tended to be about a year out. He was indicted in New York in March. Now that trial is scheduled for March. His company was indicted 2 summers ago, and then had a trial last fall. So you've seen these things take about a year to progress.
I mean, and if that's the case, we're talking about if he ends up being the nominee right in the middle of the campaign. I want to bring in CBS News Justice Department producer and reporter Robert Legare. Robert, walk us through how the timeline of this Florida case could impact the D.C. case that we're learning about just now.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So as we all know, there are 2 separate tracks being pursued by Special Counsel Jack Smith's office. The first related to the former president's handling of classified records, which you've had discussions about today. That's taking place in Florida. The second relates to the events surrounding the 2020 presidential election, the events of January 6th, and efforts to allegedly overturn the results of that election. And so, you know, those are 2 very separate and distinct tracks that Jack Smith has overseen. You know, at the same time, he has 2 prosecutorial teams that are acting very separate in their investigation. Both investigations, it's important to remember, were ongoing before he even started. And so he took these investigations on. They had their own teams, they had their own prosecutors and agents working the case. And so while they're being overseen by the same person, they're also, you know, existing in very separate worlds. And so what will have to happen now is some sort of agreement between the teams and with Jack Smith at the head as to how we are going to go about this, how they're going to go about taking a look at these cases and setting a calendar. Because as you know, the defendant can't be in one place at one time. He has a right to be and appear at every hearing and at every trial day throughout the proceedings. And so it's important that the defendants be there, that the prosecutors be there, and so they're going to weigh all of that.
Yeah, and I should say both have been going on for a while. What we're learning about this week, or what we're learning about today, is directly from former President Donald Trump, that he has received a letter and that he was called to testify within, or to appear before a grand jury within 4 days. Joining us now on Capitol Hill is CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. All right, Scott, give us the big picture on this. When are we going to see a trial? How is this all playing out over there in Capitol Hill from both sides?
Well, let's start with Florida, Lilia. It seems aspirational for Jack Smith, for the prosecution to have a trial that ends with 2023 as the date. It seems aspirational because they're asking for it. They're asking for very late in 2023, beginning December 11th, and they were met with resistance from the Trump legal team. And after an hour and 40 minutes in court today, Judge Aileen Cannon wouldn't immediately commit. So this is at least at risk, if not likely, to move into 2024. The January 15th Iowa caucuses loom large, and the primary season that follows it won't be irrelevant if this case and this trial move forward in 2024. Back here in Washington, D.C., the target letter that Trump says he had and that CBS News confirms he's received puts this on a pathway for a decision that's likely in days or weeks as to whether to file a criminal charge. Not a certainty, but a likelihood this happens in days and weeks, not months and years. All of this seems like it's a bunch of trains joining the same track at the same time, and all of them can't stop at the same station. So there may be a decision made, as Rob alluded to, as to who gets primacy on date setting, which case gets to go first. But all of this seems to be mashed up in an ugly and potentially impactful way with the 2024 caucus and primary season.
And Scott, just, remind us, what do we know about this investigation, the one in D.C. so far? Who has appeared before prosecutors? Who have been witnesses up until now? And what is it that they're trying to establish from your reporting and from what we know at this point?
The list is so long, and it includes members of the Trump inner circle. The most recent reporting was that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, was among those who spoke with or before the grand jury. Top aides, attorneys have been in and out of that room. There's been new reporting that secretaries of state in the swing states have been speaking with investigators or with the grand jury in this case. It really indicates an enormous scope, if not a growing scope, to the potential case here, Lilia. Think of all the threads that are relevant now. Not just what or who gave rise to that horrific attack on the U.S. Capitol January 6th, but what about the fake electors scheme? Deploying and galvanizing electors to swing the results of a justified and lawfully held election in the swing states. What about the efforts to raise gobs and gobs of money on these baseless election claims? And what became of that money? Also, the effort to get Mike Pence to execute some form of strategy to walk out on or stop the counting of the electoral votes on January 6th when the Congress convened. What about the alleged threats against local election officials and local election workers in some of those states? All of these threads can be relevant, which means, Lilia, at the end of the day, this could be a case that is by orders of magnitude larger in scope and size than the already large case filed in Florida, in which the former president faces nearly 36 federal charges, including felonies.
Wow. Scott MacFarlane, Cristian Benavides, Graham Cates, and Robert Legare, thank you so much for joining us and providing all of this context.